Welcome to this video created by participants in a program funded by the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. This reading program, Folktales and Stories of the South in Louisiana, is part of the Readings in Literature and Culture program known as RELIC, headed by Jim Segreto. The program is also sponsored by the St. Tammany Parish Library Adults Program, headed by Mimi Nothaker. The 6 sessions of Folktales and Stories of the South in Louisiana was held at the Causeway Branch of the St. Tammany Parish Library in Mandeville, Louisiana, from April 8th through May 13th, 2013. I'm Dr. Susan Blalock, the discussion leader for the program. I subtitled the program, Celebrating Ourselves, because we are the folk in Folktales. We Southerners tell stories to explain or imply almost everything about our culture, but we forget how well they convey who we are. Recorded folktales are extremely valuable in transmitting our culture. However, the act of making them literate takes some of the spontaneity out of them and can make them seem odd and a bit rigid. When we ourselves tell tales to our friends and cohorts, that natural lilt returns. The facial expressions and asides reveal the humor or embarrassment of the situation. I hope you enjoy these tales. They run the gamut from animal fables to anecdotes about current politics and situations. Please support your LEH and your public library. Well, Choppa, so you have a story for us tonight?
That's right. I'm Louis Chopin Cusack, better known as Choppa. And I have a story from the childhood of my father, who told it several times. Seems that when he was in high school at Warren Easton, they were assigned to write a paper in history, given a list of topics, and he picked a general topic. And he went home, he made an appointment with his father, and laid out the topic, and his father said, yes, that's a very good one, and come with me. And he took him to his library, and there on a shelf, he showed him there were 3 volumes on a shelf, and they were the autobiographies of the 3 people most concerned with that incident in the early city. So my father wrote his paper and turned it in, and a week or so later, my grandfather found a book adrift. Now, this was a very serious offense. My father was the 4th of 5 boys, and there were very strict rules about not leaving school books and papers out. And so my grandfather picked up the book to see who should be reprimanded, and sticking out from the book was his paper. And the teacher had written, you were supposed to go to the library and do research, not make up quotations. So my grandfather went back to his library. He checked every quotation, caught a few errors in punctuation and one in translation. And the next day when my father got home, he was grabbed by the ear and taken back to school. And the unfortunate teacher was still in the classroom when they arrived. And my grandfather got himself up to his full 5 feet 2, stuck out the paper and said, what do you mean by this? And the teacher said, there's nothing like that in the library. Why didn't you ask him where he got it? And the teacher gave that look of, it's beneath my dignity to ask a student a question like that. My grandfather paused for a moment and said, if I thought you were a gentleman, I'd ask the name of your second, but you're obviously not worth shooting. But if you think one of my boys has lied, you tell me. If he has, I'll beat the hell out of him. And if he hasn't, you'll answer to me. And he stormed out. And the teacher was a bit surprised, caught the principal and said, who's this madman Gaspar Cusack? Oh, he's the president of the Louisiana Historical Society. He has one of the better collections in Louisiana colonial history in the area. And you say he threatened to challenge you to duel, but didn't? Oh, you're so lucky, because if he had, you'd be taking the next train out of town, because he's a dead shot with a dueling pistol. So the rest of the semester, my father was very quiet and subdued in history class.
What a good story, Choppa. That's a fabulous story.
I'm Penelope Lawrence Gilles, and this story was told to me and to my class by a storyteller at the American School of Paris. The name of the story is You Never Know. A long time ago, in a faraway place, there lived a man who made his living by raising horses. One night, his barn caught on fire, and they had to let all the brood mares go. They ran away into the forest, and it was a disaster for the man. All the people said, "Oh no, what a terrible thing to happen. Oh, what a catastrophe." But the man said, "What appears to be a curse may turn out to be a blessing. What appears to be a blessing may turn out to be a curse." Sure enough, in about a month or two, when the weather got cold, the mares returned to the barn, accompanied by a beautiful stallion. Everyone said, "Wow, what a great opportunity for you. This is going to be wonderful." But the man said, "What appears to be a blessing may turn out to be a curse. What appears to be a curse may turn out to be a blessing." The man's young son thought the stallion was so beautiful that he wanted to ride it. So he mounted on this very wild horse, and he was thrown. His leg was badly broken in 2 places, and the doctor said that the boy might never walk properly again. Everyone was so sorry. But the man said, "What appears to be a curse may turn out to be a blessing. What appears to be a blessing may turn out to be a curse." A few months later, a military regiment came through the town, conscripting all the able-bodied young men. But when they got to the man's house and saw that his son was still in bad shape with his leg in a cast, they would not take him. So he grew up and married and had many children and lived a long life. You never know. What appears to be a curse may turn out to be a blessing. What appears to be a blessing may turn out to be a curse.
This is a true story that I think might fit the bill of a folk tale. My grandfather was the son of an itinerant minister in Mississippi, and he had to stay home and run the farm so his dad could go about his preaching. So when Papa got to be about 21 years old, he decided that that really wasn't quite the life he wanted, and he wanted to go back to school. So he started in the 1st grade. He was over 6 feet tall. He sat at a little desk, and all of the children called him Grandpa. He whizzed right through high school, went to college, got out of college, became the editor of a newspaper. Then, after that, he became a member of the legislature. But his main business was he had a farmer's warehouse. And if you've ever been in a small town where a lot of farming goes on, you know, it was like feed, seed, fertilizer, you name it, we've got it. We've got flour with your wife can make dresses out of. We buy chickens. We do everything. And so Papa ran the store for a long, long time, and he was quite the character in the town. When my father got back from college, he decided that he would just take over the business. And every Saturday, I was about, well, this was happening before I started there, but every Saturday was the big day for everybody to come into town. So they would come in wagons, trucks, you know, all kind horses, and the women would come too. It was just a big day for everybody to come to town. And I remember a lady named Mrs. Heidelberg always came in and wanted you to buy her eggs and her chickens. And my job was to count the eggs, which she never believed she got the right count, you know, and then to tie up her chickens and weigh them. It was quite an interesting time in my life. But Papa, by the time I started helping out, just really, I mean, they paid me for not doing much. I was in the 7th grade, and Papa was well over 80 years old by then. And so he had kind of stopped working there. And there was a great big pot-bellied stove that they put in the front of the store. and they had tin all around the edge of it. And the farmers that would come in, they had about 6 rocking chairs around there. They'd grab a rocking chair, and they'd all sit down, and they would chew tobacco, spit on the floor, smoke or whatever. Papa didn't do any of those things, smoking or spitting on the floor, but it was there for anybody that wanted to come in. So while they and talk. So while they were sitting there one day, a man came in with a fine hat and a suit, and he was carrying a rolled up piece of paper in his hand, and he walked back to where they were all sitting and rocking, and he unrolled his paper, and he showed him he had a package, just you could see things, the spectacles were sitting there, fine bunch of glasses. So he unrolled his thing for people to look at, and of course it was for reading glasses, reading the alphabet, so that he could see who really needed glasses. And he told them all, this will really make a change in your life. So he came to my grandfather first, and so he pointed to the first letters, and he said, can you read that? And he said, nope. So we went on to the next. Can you read this one? No, sir. How about this one? No, sir. And when he got up to the top one, he said, can you read this? And Papa said, no, sir. No, I can't read. And that's my story.
Hi, I'm Skip Harrison from Mandeville, Louisiana. I'm going to share a story of a Haitian folktale. And Haitian folktales are often told in the villages, probably around a 55-gallon drum with old tires smoking and burning in them to keep warm on a cool, wet night. And if someone wants to tell a story, they will address the audience, which usually isn't very big. I'm guessing 25, 30 people would be a big crowd. And they would, in an interrogative tone, ask, creek? Creek? And if the audience wants that person to tell a story, they'll reply with, crack. Crack.
Crack.
Yes. This story, a little bit of background. Water is a very, very rare commodity in Haiti. Despite their rains and hurricanes and mudslides, they can't seem to get it where they want it so they can use it the way they need it. And the author's daughter was visiting, the author and her daughter were visiting, and little Rachel was around 4 years old, that it's fun to wash your hands and face age, you know. And Rachel had used up the family's 3-day supply of water allotment for flushing the toilet, for brushing their teeth, and for bathing. Needless to say, the host and hostess were just really pretty upset about this. But they were good about it. In areas where there is irrigation systems for the farmers, each farmer is allowed only a few hours a day of water for his fields, and it's well known that the controller of irrigation is much wealthier than the mayor, or the judge, or the chief of police, for obvious reasons, right? And a lot of people with no irrigation systems have to walk literally miles to get water, just for their basic, potable water. Creek?
Crack.
One evening, the story is called Papa God and General Death. One evening, 2 men were walking a hillside, Papa God and General Death. As they walked along, General Death pointed to a large yellow stone house overlooking the valley and said, "Last week I took one from there." Then he pointed to a smaller house down the path. "Tomorrow I shall take one from there." "You're always taking from people," said Papa God, "and I am always giving to them. That is why people prefer me." "Oh, I wouldn't be so certain of that," said General Death. "Well, let's see," said Papa God. Let's ask that man you will be visiting tomorrow for some water and see whether he gives more water to you or to me." So Papa God walked up the path to the small house, and Death stood waiting by the road. "Good evening," Papa God called from outside the gate. "Have you some water for a thirsty man?" "I haven't a drop," the man answered. "I beg of you," said Papa God, "I'm very thirsty, and I'm sure Papa God would be pleased if you would give me some water." "My good fellow, don't talk to me of Papa God. Do you know how far we have to go for water? 10 miles, 5 miles to the spring and 5 miles back. And Papa God makes places where there is so much water people are swimming in it. No, don't talk to me of Papa God." "My good man," Papa God said patiently, "if you knew with whom you were speaking, I'm certain you would give me some water." "Who are you?" asked the man. I am Papa God." "Papa God," said the man, "I still do not have any water, but I will tell you this, if General Death should pass this way, then I would have water." "How is that?" asked God. "Because Death has no favorites. Rich, poor, young, old, they are all the same to him. Last week he took the owner of the large house on the hill. The week before he took my neighbor's wife, the week before a young baby, the week before that an old man. Death takes from all the houses. But you give all the water to some people and leave me here with 10 miles to go on my donkey just for one drop." Now, Papa God saw Death motioning to him. It was Death's turn. Shaking his head sadly, Papa God walked away. Several minutes later, General Death walked up the path. "Good evening," he said. "Can you give me some water?" "If you please," said the man. "What is your name?" "I am General Death." The man excused himself, went into his house. He returned with a calabash full of cool water. "Drink," he said to General Death. "Drink as much as you wish." And Death drank. He drank long and he drank fully. And he must have been pleased, for the next day he did not stop at the small house, but continued on his route down the hill. Thank you.
Keeping in mind what Jim said, creek, crack. So if it's not good, it's y'all's fault. Y'all asked for it. I'm Robert Cooper. Really just a quick story that we were always told growing up. I have no idea if it's true or not. But my family were not big fans of Huey Long, primarily because my grandmother's uncle was Senator Joseph Ransdell. And when Huey Long got tired of being governor and wanted to be in the United States Senate, he ran against Senator Ransdell and called him Old Feather Duster. Huey Long was very ugly to him, and they never forget. Of course, Huey Long crushed him in the election and went to the United States Senate, hoping to be president if he hadn't been assassinated. But anyhow, so the Hunters were not real fans of Huey Long. But Huey Long, being the short man that he was, continued to try and cater to them. And my grandfather, who was pretty much of an imbiber and a gambler and stuff like that, would invite Huey over. They lived in Alexandria, to come and play poker. Well, my grandmother, it apparently just killed her that Huey Long was doing that. So they're playing poker one night, and he took everything that my grandfather had in terms of cash, not the house and the children or anything like that. But being the short man that he is, the next morning, there's one jewelry store in Alexandria, and it's called Schnack's. Well, the next morning, here comes the Schnack's delivery truck, and this is back in the early 30s. And it's a full silver coffee and tea service that Huey Long had sent to my grandmother to try and win them over. Now, whether it's true or not, I don't know. But that's the story of Huey Long.
I'm Mary Culver, and my short story is from the newspaper, and I thought it was so good. I saved it for quite some time. I forget how old it is, but it's at least 2 months old, I think. And it's about this character here, this pig. Did anybody see this? No? All right. Well, I'm going to shorten down a little bit. This was the time of the Super Bowl blackout. We all remember that, huh? And when the lights were dimming in the dome, the Lake Pontchartrain police got a call about a critter on the bridge. So for a span that's seen even an occasional horse or an alligator, cats or dogs, this call didn't seem all that crazy somehow. When the officers arrived on the scene, they found something they'd never seen before on the bridge, a pot-bellied pig. This is the first pig of record, they said. And they finally were able to corral this 60-pound animal in the southbound lanes a few miles from the Mandeville toll plaza. And they took it to the first crossover where they realized it had fallen out of the back of somebody's truck. We're not sure quite how the pig got out of the vehicle, said the Causeway commissioner. Smart pig, said the police chief, Nick Conjamie. And the pig, who was used for breeding, suffered a broken leg, but he will be all right. And the driver of the vehicle, whose name was not available, fortunately, was cited with having a, quote, loose load. The porker not only survived, but they said of it, and this is the headline of the year probably that this editor is going to be teased about forever. The headline is Couchant Delay on Causeway. And of course, if you know French, then couchant delay is like a pig cooked in milk, as well as the delay on the bridge. So I just thought you would. I have a longer one, but I don't know if the one I read you all before on my Lapin story. You want that?
Lapin story.
All right. Okay. I like Peter Rabbit so well in the French version because he's such a cheeky little character that I decided to try my own hand at writing one of these stories. And some of you I apologize to because you heard it last week. Pierre Lapin and Monsieur Cocodrie, Monsieur Alligator. Lapin was a cheeky fellow. He was sure he was the most intelligent of all the animals, and he was confident he could answer any and all of their questions. The roe deer asked him, Lapin, how can I get a drink of water without being gobbled up by Monsieur Cocodrie, who just lurks in the bottom of the pond? Lapin answers, that's easy. Just make sure you don't step on anything that looks like a big black log and glares at you as you get a drink. The butterfly then asks Lapin, how can I get the nectar I need to drink from the flowers without a bird swooping down and eating me? Oh, that's easy, says Lapin. Just make sure you stay under the cover of the leaves of trees and bushes so the birds don't see you. Don't flutter out there over the open meadow where they can see you and gobble you up. The young raccoon then asked, Lapin, how can I avoid getting showered by the skunk? It's such a terrible smell, and it takes months to get rid of. Think nothing of it, says Lapin. Just make sure that whenever you approach the skunk, you don't come up behind him and startle him. Just walk up to him face to face and politely wish him a good day. That's all. One day, Lapin was walking home. It was hot and dusty, and he badly needed to sit down for a little while before he continued his journey. Right along the side of the road ahead of him, he spotted a perfect spot, a log just the right size for him to sit down on and rest. He hurried on a little, sat down, and sighed with relief. The sun was hot on his back, and he felt himself dropping off to sleep. It was so warm, he felt like dozing, taking a little nap before he started walking again. But then he felt the log beginning to move just a little. Oh, mon Dieu, he muttered hastily, waking up. The log began thrashing about, making hissing noises, and it had big jaws which opened up and tried to capture him. It was that cocodrie again, and this time he had sat down on him. Lapin was so frightened that he almost took wing. He flew up at least 7 or 8 feet in the air, tumbled about a few times, and landed in the branches of a tree. He clung there, trembling, and looking down at Monsieur Cocodrie, who was scratching at the bottom of the tree, hissing, threatening him, opening and shutting those big jaws, and oh, what a big mouth he had. Why, Monsieur Cocodrie could grab him up and swallow him whole in just one gulp. Lapin clung tighter to his tree, and he made a little nest there by weaving a couple of branches together. Birds flew by. Lapin, they asked, "What are you doing up here in the tree? Are you moving in with us? Are you planning to invite Mademoiselle Lapin up here and make a nest for your babies?" Lapin was too disgusted to even answer. He just snorted loudly. He knew everyone was already laughing at him. What on earth was a rabbit doing up a tree? Finally, Monsieur Cocodrie got tired and he trundled off back into the waters of his black pond to cool off. Still, Lapin was afraid to come down, so he spent the night up in the tree. And with the first light of dawn, he looked all about. There was no alligator around, nothing that even looked like one. He made sure of that. He wouldn't let himself be fooled again. Slowly, he shimmered his way down the tree trunk and stuck one big toe on the ground. Then he put both feet down, wiggled his cottontail in delight, and did a little dance. How good it was to be on firm, solid land again. He had never been so sore before. All his muscles ached from holding onto that tree so tight and for so long. He was sure he didn't want to spend another night up there or build a nest up there in which to raise baby rabbits. And he also knew from his own personal experience that rabbits were never meant to live in trees.
Hi, I'm Wendy. I grew up in upstate rural New York, which is a lot like Louisiana because except it's colder in the winter and it's hillier. Otherwise, it's very similar. The people, though, are quite different. Here, people are sort of happy and friendly and tell joking stories, and my relatives and the people I grew up with were sort of somber and sort of quiet. And I go up there now, and it's kind of hard for me to talk to because I'm used to all of you. So it's hard to talk to my family now. But so there were 2 secret stories. Now, my family told stories, and constantly told stories. We didn't have TVs or anything. And so the stories were about hunting and in times of the past and get-togethers, big get-togethers, and they were all very serious family stories. But there were 2 secret stories that it took years to come out, and they were very interesting stories to me. I would drive around a lot with my grandmother, and she would take me to old cemeteries and old homes, and she would introduce me to the past. We initially came over in 1650, so she would take me to a lot of the old sites, and there used to be a house here and a foundation, and somebody lived there, and so little by little it came out. She'd take me to her old house where she grew up, and she actually was French, and at the turn of the century, I don't remember the date, but you know, in the early 1900s, a lot of my family had dairy cows, and of course they had cows in orchards and whatever. And they started testing cows for tuberculosis because the milk was all polluted and people would get sick. So they tested my grandmother's father's farm, and they flunked his farm because his cows were tuberculin. And so he got the official documentation, and he was supposed to have them slaughtered. Well, he sold them illegally, and he was found out. And so he did what all good New York farmers do when they get caught in a terrible, terrible dilemma. He hung himself in his barn. And the other secret story took many more years to come out. There was a beautiful gorge where we'd like to go play, and it had secret rock tunnels and little slides of water we could slide down. So us kids, I had 35 cousins, and we would sneak off to the gorge, and it was several miles over the hills and the trees. And my uncle would know where we were, and my father would know, and everybody would know we were going to Brown's Gorge. But we would talk about the Indian tree. And the Indian tree was where, long ago, the Iroquois Indians, who still exist today and still have reservations today, they had taken two trees at some point and tied them together so they could hang a cook pot and have a fire and cook. So it was an H tree, like a small H. Eventually they grew in and it was just one tree. So whenever we talked about going to Brown's Gorge, I would go to the H tree and then we cut this way and that way, and it was a direction point for us. But whenever we would mention to our grandfather we were going to the Indian tree, he would act concerned or startled or don't go there, or there's some problem with it. What's wrong with the Indian tree? And it took years and years and years for him to explain what was wrong with the Indian tree. And he said, well, the Indian tree isn't in H. The Indian tree is where a tree fell over, and I think it's all rotted and gone now. And I said, no, I was there last week. I saw it. And finally he explained, after many years, what the Indian tree was to him. Sometime 100 years ago now, they always were concerned about us going to Brown's Gorge, and the farm family that actually owned it, it was not us, it was a couple farms over. And we had to get permission, and they were very careful and never go secretly and whatever. There was always a concern about Brown's Gorge that was disconcerting. Well, it turned out that the Iroquois, as they continued to, time passed, they kept migrating, and some of them would still come through and still migrate. And the farmer that didn't like the last little old Indian migrating over his land shot him and stuck his body in the roots of a fallen over tree. And so those are the two family secret stories. The death of the local Indian, the last Indian, and the death of my great-grandfather.
I'm Susan Blalock, and the facilitator of this RELIC program. This is a true story, I guess. I mean, I got it from my father, who was a lawyer, which sort of features in this story. We were talking about the mafia and what happened to the mafia. Well, when I guess this was in the 70s, and we used to go to Moscas for dinner, and it's just a fabulous restaurant in Boutique, and it's the legend is that Mosca was Al Capone's cook, and when the jig was sort of up or something in Chicago, that he came down here and founded this little restaurant in the middle of nowhere where nobody would find him. And whether this is true, I don't know, but we'd all heard this. And it's a little white building, and it had little checkered tablecloths, and it looked like the mafia might own it, So we went in there one night, and I have there's actually two stories that corroborate this, and I still don't know if it's true. We went in there one night, and we had this wonderful dinner with oysters, Mosca, and all that. And we were leaving, and these people came in, and they said, "Oh, is Mama Mosca here?" And they said, "Oh, no, Mama Mosca's not here tonight. Some friends came down from Chicago, and they went to the Blue Room to hear Tony Bennett." I went, "Oh, really? We have friends from Chicago." Well, that's not so conclusive, but my father had a law partner, a Jewish law partner, in Jacksonville, Florida. And he was this huge University of Florida fan, and he had his buddy had Florida 1 and he had Florida 2 on his license plate. And they never, ever, missed a Florida game. Well, Florida was playing in this Sugar Bowl one. This must have been like in the 70s or sometime. Can't remember when exactly. But anyway, so they came over to New Orleans to go to the Sugar Bowl and watch Florida play somebody. I don't know, LSU or Tulane or somebody. And of course, there was no place to eat because the town was just full of all these football fans. So my father's law partner, Akel, his name is Akel, his friend said, oh, listen, don't worry about it. I'm going to call my pal Trafalgari, and he'll tell us where to go eat. So he does, and he told him to go to Moscas. So they go, oh, great. So they had a car, they had their cars, Florida 1 and Florida 2. So they head out across the Huey P. Long, and they get to Booty, and they go into Moscas, and they say, Trafalgari sent us. And they said, well, great, sit down. You don't have to order a thing. We will take care of you. So they sat down, and they just, all of you know who've been there, and the food is just fabulous. So they just bring all this food out, and they feed them, and they have this fabulous dinner, and at the end, they won't let them pay. And they said, don't worry, you don't need to pay for it at all. Just tell Mr. Trafalgari, you had a great dinner, and that's fine. That's all. It's great with us. So they come back to Jacksonville, and Akel tells this story to my dad. And my dad says, well, Paul, Akel was his last name. Well, Paul, don't you know who Trafalgari is? And he said, well, no. Who's Trafalgari? He said, he's the godfather of the Tampa Mafia. He said, and if they call you up with an offer you can't refuse, you'll know why. So that's my story of Moscas, and maybe there is a mafia connection.
My name is Jim Long, and go back to 1961-62 because I was in high school in a Catholic boys' school in New Orleans at the time, and it was it's the era of the space race. It's the 61-62. We're heading to the moon, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Catholic schools in New Orleans, Catholic schools everywhere do these fundraising drives where they sell raffle tickets or they sell spaghetti, dinners or whatever. They're always selling something. There's always competition between the homerooms. So, here I am. I think this is second year high school. So we had 201, 202, 203, 204, all the way to 208 or whatever, 209. And you always knew who were the smart people because they were in 201 or 101 or 301 or 401. Well, I was in 202, so I was, I never did quite make it to the 201 or 101. In fact, I moved up from 103 to because people dropped out. I moved up from 103 to 202, probably because they just pruned out because they couldn't pay the tuition anymore. That's what I figured. But anyway, I wound up in 202, homeroom 202, and here's where the mafia thing comes in. We're selling tickets, so, the fall festival, whatever. Drives for money. So we had a fellow in there who was named Carlos Marcello III. He was the grandson of the big fellow who's listed on his IRS that he was a tomato salesman, which was Carlos Marcello. He was famous for listing his occupation as tomato salesman on his IRS. So we used to joke around a little bit with Carlos, got any tomatoes today, and stuff like that. How's the Creoles doing this year? And he took it pretty well. But everybody knew Carlos Marcello's. They would be in the lobby of the school that I went to. There would be markers of how you were doing. How you have the thermometer with how you're doing on the United Fund or whatever. Well, the one that I really remember was the space race, which was, they had little spacecrafts, Mercury spacecraft, Gemini spacecraft, whatever it was, on the ceiling of the lobby of each homeroom of how we were doing for the Fall Festival Rally, which we were selling tickets to a Rambler, whoever makes the Ramblers. It was a 60, do they even make them anymore? I don't even know. But 1962 Rambler, and that was donated to the school. So, they were making it all kind of ways. But anyway, it was a joke. It was always a joke because whoever, you could always tell which homeroom Carlos Marcello was in, all the way through, freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior year. In the sophomore year, the space the little satellite thing, the spacecraft. The moon was here, Earth was here, the moon was there, that was the goal. And Carlos Marcello's class was zoomed out so far ahead of every other class. They would just left us behind. We were saying, like, what, you must be the Russians or something because y'all are going to get there first or whatever, you know. And so Carlos always had, his rocket was always way ahead. And so the offer that you can't refuse, when Carlos, you know, wanted to sell some tickets, I'll take twice the number, you know, and that rocket just flew. So that's my story.
I picked this up when I was teaching at Loyola, but Carlos Marcello had a daughter who graduated from Loyola, and the day before graduation, they had the usual baccalaureate service. And the Jesuit who was preaching the occasion had I'm not sure what his theme was, but his refrain was, "But I've never seen $1 million." And it ended, Carlos said impassively. A couple of days later, after the graduation, a couple of fellows in coveralls show up with a large toolbox at the Jesuit residence. Want to speak with Father so-and-so. And he comes down, and each of them takes a key from a pocket, opens a lock, and they opened it, and it's full of money. And the priest says, "Is this a gift?" They said, "The boss wants you to count it." So he counted $1 million in cash. And when he finished, he stood there a moment, and they locked it back up and said, "The boss wants to make sure you can never say again, 'I've never seen $1 million.'"